On the night of April 15th, 1912, the Titanic sinks off the coast of Newfoundland. More than 1,500 people perish in the shipwreck. The White Star Line Company, owner of the liner, will charter 4 ships to recover the bodies of the victims of this tragedy. One of these ships will be the CGS Montmagny. This modest supply ship will be sent out in the wake of the most famous shipwreck of all time. It will sail amongst the wreckage of the Titanic, and its captain will even keep a relic of the shipwreck. But the Montmagny's journey is perhaps an ill omen, prophesizing for it the same tragic fate as the Titanic. On April 15, 1912, the whole world learns with astonishment of the sinking of the Titanic. The first press news and official statements of the White Star Line are wrongfully reassuring. They misleadingly claim that all passengers were evacuated all safe and sound. And yet, the dispatches in the following hours and days begin to reveal the extent of the tragedy. The Carpathia sails for New York with 705 survivors on board. The Carpathia sails back up the North River, escorted by tugboats and yachts, crammed with journalists and photographers on the evening of Thursday, April 18, 1912. From Battery Park, more than 10,000 bystanders observed the liner quietly sliding toward the White Star's pier. Despite the rain and cold weather, a crowd of more than 30,000 people wait for the survivors. 13 lifeboats from the Titanic are lowered, and then the Carpathia docks at the Cunard Line, Pier 54. Around 9:35 in the evening, the first survivors of this unthinkable tragedy descend the footbridge.
The reaction would have been one of absolute total shock. It would be compared to the experience that we felt the morning we woke up and the World Trade Towers fell on September the 11th. Titanic represented the latest advances in marine engineering, just as the World Trade Towers represented the highest standards of architectural engineering. They weren't supposed to fall. Titanic wasn't supposed to sink.
The White Star Company's directors quickly take measures to recover the bodies of the victims. The first ship to be chartered for the amount of $550 US per day is the cable ship Mackay Bennett. The ship arrives at the scene of the shipwreck on the evening of April 20th. Its mission is to recover the remains of the victims and try to identify them.
The cable ship has orders to remain on scene of the wreck for at least a week. But should a large number of bodies be recovered before that time, she'll return to Halifax with them. The search for bodies will not be abandoned until not a vestige of hope remains for any more recoveries. J. Bruce Ismay, Chairman and Managing Director of the White Star Line and survivor of the Titanic.
The Mackay Bennett carries on board 100 tons of large ice blocks, 125 coffins, and 2 embalmers. The search starts April 21st at daybreak. Most of the corpses wear life jackets and are dressed warmly. They try to identify the victims from the contents of their pockets or their wallets, or from a letter, a ticket, or initials on their clothes. Those who can be identified immediately by an object or a facial appearance are embalmed. However, the differences in the social status are perpetuated even in death. The remains of the first-class passengers are put in coffins on the bridge, whereas second and third class and crew members are wrapped in canvas bags. On the morning of April 26, the Mackay Bennett is joined by the Minia. More corpses are recovered and dropped off on the Mackay Bennett. 116 corpses in a state of advanced decomposition are sewn in canvas bags and filled with steel bars and buried at sea. The Mackay Bennett lets the Minia carry on its search in the area of the shipwreck. and on April 30th enters Halifax Harbor with 190 victims on board. Despite unfavorable meteorological conditions, the Minia carries on its mission and recovers 17 more bodies. The Minia returns to Halifax on May 6th, and like the Mackay Bennett, must return to its regular duties. In the meantime, the owners of the Titanic try to find another vessel in order to continue the search. They appeal to an agent of the Canadian Department of Marine and Fisheries, C.H. Harvey, to charter a ship, the CGS Montmagny. The government accepts the White Star's request, even though it is the busiest time of the year for the ships of the Canadian fleet. Faster than the Minia and the Mackay Bennett, the Montmagny is a ship fully capable of continuing the search.
The Montmagny was a resupply ship. It also installed and recovered buoys as well as delivered construction materials. So in 1912, when the Montmagny was to be asked to recover the bodies of the Titanic, it was a ship that was well suited for that kind of job. Its working deck was almost at water level, which permitted it to install buoys in the water very easily. It was equipped with booms that allowed it to recover anything on the water. It was an ideal ship for this sort of search.
On May 3, 1912, the Montmagny leaves its home port of Sorel. It docks at Halifax on May 6 to load food for 10 days or more and cargo needed, ice, coffins, and canvas bags, to accomplish its grim duty. 2 embalmers and 2 priests will be part of the voyage. Father Patrick McQuillan of the Catholic Basilica of St. Mary and Reverend Samuel Henry Prince of St. Paul's Anglican Church. The vessel's regular captain, François-Xavier Pouliot, must share his command with Captain Peter Johnson, who was in charge of the lighthouse services. The tale of Captain Pouliot's expedition would be told many times to his descendants. One of his grandchildren, retired sea pilot Michel Pouliot, has known the story down to the smallest detail since childhood.
My father told us about my grandfather's expedition to the wreck of the Titanic. It's always very sad for seamen to witness the scene of a shipwreck.
On Thursday, May 9th, the Montmagny gets to the last known position of the Titanic, as transmitted by the final distress signal only a few minutes before it sank into the depths of the North Atlantic. At 2:45 in the afternoon, the first corpse is seen and recovered. It is a man wearing a white Stuart jacket and a life vest. The following day, May 10th at 10:25 a.m., a life preserver is sighted. As they approach, the men of the Montmagny notice a hand grasping the life preserver. They discover under the life preserver the corpse of a man whose wrist is tangled in the rope. The corpse is hauled up onto the bridge, and an address is found in one of his pockets that will allow identification. It is 21-year-old third-class passenger Harold Reynolds. On the same day at 2:30, another corpse is discovered. A young girl, approximately 15 years of age, believed to be a Syrian immigrant. 10 minutes later, another corpse is recovered. It is C. Smith, a member of the crew. The corpse of the alleged steward recovered the day before cannot be identified. Therefore, it is buried at sea. But during the funeral services, a strange coincidence will have a profound impact on Captain Pouliot.
It was a completely calm day. There was no wind. And when the ceremony ended, a light gust of wind rung the bell of the Montmagny. My grandfather was moved, and it is with much emotion that he told this story to my father. It was a very emotional moment when a slight gust of wind rung the bell of the Montmagny at that precise moment of the funeral. Despite the fog, a calm sea, and no wind whatsoever.
Ça nous a souvent revenu à la mémoire.
This is something we thought of often when we became seamen ourselves.
À ce moment qui était un moment inoubliable.
The recovery of the corpses by the Montmagny is photographed by Reverend Prince. The priest takes more than 20 photographs. He will later make magic lantern slides that he will use during his lectures on the subject of the Titanic. We see here, for the first time on screen, some of the photographs carefully kept by Michel Pouliot. These images are part of the legacy left by his grandfather. However, the captain of the Montmagny left his family an object which is even more evocative of the Titanic disaster.
Alors, la boîte du Titanic.
This is the life preserver of the Titanic.
Lors du naufrage du Titanic, la bouée qui
It held Harold Reynolds' body during the 3 weeks following the shipwreck.
Pendant les 3 semaines suivant le naufrage.
His arm was tangled in the rope of the life preserver.
Par le bras seulement. Mon grand-père a.
My grandfather returned home to Ile d'Orléans with the life preserver, and we keep it as a symbol of this tragedy.
De cette atroce tragédie.
That relic from the Titanic was Harold Reynolds' last hope for survival. He desperately clung to it, praying that one of the lifeboats would come and save him. But his cries for help, along with the screams of hundreds of victims immersed in ice-cold waters, were not heard. To look at the life preserver reminds one of the last moments of Harold Reynolds on board the Titanic. Harold Reynolds is a baker, native of Lewisham in London, who is going to join a friend in Toronto who has also immigrated to Canada. In the evening of April 14th, 1912, the Titanic hits an iceberg at 11:40 at night. Harold Reynolds is probably in his cabin located on one of the lower bridges in the front of the ship. Out of 709 third-class passengers, more than 400, mostly single men, have their quarters at the bow of the ship, while the single women and families are in the back. Given that the impact perforated the front right side of the Titanic, it is most likely that Reynolds and his companions were awakened by the shock. While the young cook quickly realizes that an accident has just happened, it is less obvious for the steerage passengers whose cabins are located at the stern of the ship, thus far from the point of impact.
The third-class passengers, because of immigration laws at the time, United States immigration law required that once you got aboard in Southampton or Liverpool or wherever, you were locked into third class, and you remained there for the entire voyage. You were allowed up on deck, but there was a third class area. When the ship was sinking, of course, the rules were you couldn't open the gates. Third class passengers were locked into that area and basically had to break down the barricades to get to the lifeboats.
Harold Reynolds succeeds in reaching the upper decks. Why can't he get on a lifeboat? Could it be that he found himself on the left side of the ship, where the officer responsible for launching the boats only allowed women and children aboard? Or is it more likely that Reynolds reached the boat deck after 2:05 a.m., when they had launched the last lifeboat? Facing the ship's death throes and understanding that all is lost, many passengers decide to dive into the water. Harold Reynolds may have taken a chance by grabbing a life preserver and diving into the dark waters of the North Atlantic. Once in the frigid water, Reynolds' chance of surviving depend on the return of the lifeboats. Afraid of being capsized by panic-stricken survivors, the passengers lucky enough to be on board the lifeboats keep their distance, despite the desperate calls for help. Only Lifeboat 14 returns and picks up 4 survivors. But Reynolds is not among them. After a few minutes in waters of -2 degrees Celsius, he dies of hypothermia, while the Titanic plunges to the bottom of the ocean below his lifeless body. For Michel Pouliot, the life preserver recovered by his grandfather is as much a part of his family history as it is a part of the history of the Titanic.
Cette bouée-là, évidemment,
We used to go to my grandfather's during the summer, and the life preserver was there.
mon frère et moi, on
My brother and I, when we were about 7 and 8 years old, we used this life preserver to confirm our passion for the sea.
de la remise.
We played in the shed with it, pretending that the shed was a ship, and we used the life preserver to rescue each other.
Pour faire des sauvetages en mer. Alors, vous voyez, cette bouée.
This life preserver, rich in history, was an important toy for us.
Bouée important pour des jeunes de 7-8 ans.
But in 1985, the discovery of the Titanic shipwreck and the much-debated recoveries of many artifacts during subsequent expeditions brings the public's attention back to the liner's tragic destiny. Consequently, François-Xavier Pouliot's life preserver, one of the 48 aboard the Titanic, becomes an object of curiosity. In 1998, it will be entrusted to the Maritime Museum of Quebec at Île-sur-Mer for a while. For Michel Pouliot, the faithful conservation of his life preserver represents the greatest homage he can make to his grandfather.
Le grand-père François-Xavier Pouliot nous a légué.
The life preserver that our grandfather, captain of the Montmagny, left us at Île d'Orléans represents his work on the scene of the shipwreck of the Titanic.
De faire le travail qu'on lui avait demandé. Cette bouée, c'est lui.
This life preserver represents him and his effort. It belongs to him, and consequently, it is our duty to always keep it near us. As stipulated in my will, my descendants must always keep this life preserver in our family.
Toujours dans notre famille.
The Titanic's relics are an object of affluent collectors' desire. In 2007, the McKay Bennett ship log was sold for more than $100,000. The following year, a life jacket was auctioned at Christie's of New York and sold for $68,500. In 2007, another life jacket was sold in London for $119,000.
Titanic was a symbol of an age, and it was destroyed in an instant. Most collectors, they want to touch a piece of history, and people who save this stuff, fortunately, not only touched a piece of history, but today the pieces that they saved are worth millions.
Les efforts faits à cette date.
All the efforts to preserve the memory of François-Xavier Pouliot through this life preserver in photos are priceless.
Il y a pas assez
There is not enough money in the world to buy this life preserver, which represents for us the efforts of our grandfather, François-Xavier Pouliot, captain of the Montmagny.
Capitaine du Montmagny.
On May 12th, the Montmagny wires to White Star that persistent foggy conditions are making the search difficult. On May 13th, the ship heads for the harbor of Louisbourg to drop off 3 corpses that will be traveling to Halifax by train. The day after, the ship starts a new expedition, but all that is seen by the crew are wood fragments. On May 19th, the Montmagny stops its search. On May 15th, another ship, l'Algérien, sails to St. John's, Newfoundland. It will find only one body. The currents and the bad weather conditions carry the victims 200 kilometers away from the site of the shipwreck. White Star's officials decide to definitively put the search to an end. The search lasted 6 weeks, and 328 corpses are recovered. 119 bodies are buried at sea, and 150 are buried in Halifax. The Montmagny recovered 4 victims. The bodies of the young immigrant and the Stuart Smith were never claimed. They were buried in Halifax on May 20th. Harold Reynolds was buried on May 22nd in Halifax.
And so, this third sad search in the cold Atlantic waters comes to an end. And it's twice as sad when we think we have to come back to the many waiting friends without being able to return the bodies of the loved ones they mourn. Samuel Henry Prince.
Once its mission is over, the Montmagny returns to its usual duties. Launched September 4th, 1909 at the Sorel shipyards, this lighthouse tender of 1,269 gross registered tons is the pride of the fleet of the Department of Marine and Fisheries. 67 meters long and powered by 148 horsepower, the Montmagny's main tasks are to supply lighthouses and signal stations of the St. Lawrence River, Gulf, and estuary.
It was a new ship, elegant, a smokestack, 2 booms, a boat that in form was quite long, a beautiful cabinage in the center of the hull.
The Montmagny was part of the fleet of the Federal Department of Marine and Fisheries. Its primary function was to deliver the supplies needed by all the lighthouses. Given that there was no electricity at the time, all the lights were fueled by petrol. Many hundreds of barrels of petrol had to be transported each year. Next, there were smoke signals, that is to say, cannons or pump levers. The Montmagny transported cases of dynamite that were used as smoke signals as well. With all that, there were the supplies for the lighthouse keeper that included oil lamps, the wicks, and the tools furnished by the Department of Marine.
During the winter, the Montmagny is assigned to the coast of Nova Scotia, where it accomplishes many assignments. On December 11, 1910, it sets off to search for a buoy of Cape Sable which has become detached from its anchor. After a trip of over 1,600 kilometers, the buoy is fished out after its long journey adrift in the North Atlantic. As soon as the ship returns to Halifax, it goes to the aid of the icebreaker Stanley, which has become stuck in pack ice. The Montmagny successfully tows the icebreaker to safety. Captain François-Xavier Pouliot has had command of the ship since its commissioning. Familiar with the waters of the river, this experienced seaman has never had an accident to date while navigating. Incidentally, for 3 years, he took command of the famous steamship Eureka, which was assigned to transport pilots of the Father Point station. On September 17, 1914, the Montmagny gears up to leave the port of Quebec to supply the lighthouses of Gaspé, Newfoundland, and Ile d'Anticosti. It has a regular crew of 47 men. Passengers are also part of the journey. Achille Ouimet, an employee of the Marine Department, will start a round of inspections of the channel of Belle Isle, an assistant inspector of alarm whistles. Mrs. Joseph Richard and her 7 children will rejoin the children's father, who is the lighthouse keeper of Belle Isle. Finally, Mrs. Joseph Lavallee and her 4 children will rejoin her husband at the lighthouse of Flower Island near the coast of Newfoundland. At the time, because of their prolonged isolation, the keepers are authorized to send for their families. Because Mrs. Richard and Lavallee and her children cannot board any other ships, they are granted permission to board the Montmagny, an exceptional measure since that ship rarely carried passengers. Shortly before the departure of the Montmagny from the port of Quebec, 63-year-old pilot François Gaudreau takes command of the Lingan on Thursday, September 17, 1914, at 3:30 p.m. at Father Point Station. The Lingan is a collier chartered by the Dominion Coal Company. It has left Sydney for Montreal with a shipment of coal. Its crew is mainly Chinese.
We were seeing a lot of these colliers on the St. Lawrence at the beginning of the 20th century because coal was being delivered to the metal processing factories in Montreal and the Great Lakes. Coal that came from Nova Scotia. There were a lot of colliers that operated each week on the river, a little like the patrol tankers of our time. These coal ships often sailed at full speed in order to increase their profitability.
For ship pilot Gaudreau, the navigation season has been very trying. Last spring, while he was piloting the steamship Montfort of the Canadian Pacific, it ran aground on the sandbanks of Beauport. Held accountable for the accident, ship pilot Gaudreau lost his license for 3 months, a license that he had held for 33 years. After a short stop to unload goods at Saint-Jean on the Ile d'Orléans, the Montmagny continues its undisturbed journey on smooth waters on a clear night. The crew changes shift at 4 a.m. while sailing down the river, 42 kilometers from Quebec, south of Ile-aux-Groux. At that moment, Captain Pouliot and Second Officer François Xavier Lachance are on the bridge. While their vessel enters the channel of Beaujeu, they notice down the river the Lingan ship lights sailing west. The vessels will meet once the Montmagny passes the buoy, which delimits the channel's curve at that location. The Lingan shows its mast headlight and its port side red light. The crew on the Montmagny's bridge conclude that the ship will pass on their left side in accordance with navigation rules. In order to follow the curve of the channel, the Montmagny turns to the left and then to the right. This operation allows the Lingan's pilot, François Gaudreau, to see momentarily the starboard green lights of the Montmagny. Erroneously believing that the Montmagny wants to meet his vessel's starboard, Gaudreau brings his vessel to the left. After rounding the buoy, Captain Pouliot steers the Montmagny to the southern end of the channel in order to give more space to the Lingan. He notices that the collier has also changed its course because his green light can be seen. This means its path will cross with the Montmagny's. The Montmagny's change of course is also noticed by the Lingan. Gaudreau whistles twice to notify that he will meet the Montmagny on the right. The Montmagny whistles once to inform that it refuses the Lingan's maneuver and keeps to its right. Second Officer Lachance tells Captain Pouliot that the collier is steering a course right at them. Thus, the captain attempts to steer his ship as far southward as possible. He orders to turn right and reverse his starboard engine, full speed astern, in order to accelerate the turn. But the Lingan is too close. Even though the pilot orders full power astern, the collier continues with its course and strikes the stern of the Montmagny.
At the time of the impact, I'm convinced that my grandfather must have spared a thought for the captain of the Titanic, who was subjected to the same fate. These are extremely trying times for a seaman, so surely my grandfather must have thought that it was his turn at the time of the accident.
It is 4:15 a.m., September 18, 1914, when the nose of the Lingan pierces the left flank of the Montmagny. The cabin of the Lavallee family is literally crushed by the impact of the ship. The mother and the 4 children do not stand a chance. They die instantly, crushed in their bunks. In the hours following the drama, telegraph operator Patrick Colton tells a journalist of the Soleil of Quebec about the last moments of the Montmagny.
I heard cries of fright, desperate calls and orders. From the bridge, I heard the order to launch the lifeboats, and in all this hubbub, within the space of a minute, but it seemed like ages, I heard the screams of the little children in the public room's cabins. I ran to the public room door to help them, but when I arrived, the water was already so high that I was pushed away into the stairs.
There was water in the public room on each side where the cabins were. I was able to grab Mrs. Richard's 2 children, but they were so scared and panicked. They wanted to see their mother. I tried to control them, but they got away.
It was pitch dark when I got through the engine room's door. I heard screams and I saw 2 children on the bridge. The children were yelling, "Mother, mother." I grabbed the children on the way and I told them to come with me. I held them by their arms and I brought them in front of the wire line attached to the back mast to get them aboard the Lingan. But They were screaming, "Not this way, indicating me to the back. When I was about to climb the ladder that led to the back rooms, I saw there was about 2 or 3 feet of water. At that moment, several pieces of wood fell on my back. I fell into the water that was flooding the bridge, and I dropped the 2 children. The current carried them away from me. When I got back up, I only heard their screams. I never saw them again.
A few seconds after the collision, the stern of the Montmagny sinks with alarming speed. The engine room is quickly flooded. The boilers are submerged and the dynamo stops, plunging the ship into total darkness.
To explain the speed with which the Montmagny sank, the event must be put in context. We have a ship around 215 feet long that weighs about 1,200 tons, and we have a monster, 300 feet long, that arrives in front of us, and this ship is about twice as heavy as the Montmagny. What's more, it is filled with 8,000 tons of coal. So imagine the impact. So it's quite obvious that the weight ratio is not equal at all. Now, added to this, the coal ship hit the Montmagny full on the side, in the most vulnerable part of the ship. It's normal then that in making a gaping hole on the side of the boat, the water floods in very quickly and flows very fast. The Montmagny didn't have a chance of staying afloat in such conditions.
The Lingan almost immediately extricates itself from the fatal injury it has inflicted on the Montmagny. The Montmagny's crew flee the ship in distress by jumping onto the bridge of the collier.
I was on the Lingan's bridge. I had just boarded when I saw 2 little girls who seemed to be the oldest of Mr. Richard's children on the starboard side. Water was up to their waists. They were calling for their mother. We started screaming as loud as we could, telling them to climb on the cabin at the back, but they took no notice of us.
Less than 5 minutes after the collision, the Montmagny disappears in a rush of turbid water.
The ship rolled again and continued to sink. They yelled at me from the Lingan's bridge to escape and told me they would pull me in with a rope. I then jumped on an external cabin. They caught me by my shirt and they hauled me up onto the Lingan's bridge. When I got on the bridge, I leaned on the quarterboards, looking over to see there was nothing left of the Montmagny but roiling water.
I saw a second officer Lachance with 2 small children. The poor children were clinging to him, crying. Lachance was trying to launch the lifeboat while keeping the children near him. But the Montmagny immediately went down, along with the officer and the 2 children.
Aboard the Lingan, the crew rushed to give warm clothes to the survivors. A quick count shows that all members of the crew of the Montmagny survived except for Second Officer Lachance. However, every member of the 2 families on board lost their lives. Soon after the disappearance of the Montmagny, 2 cadavers are recovered by a lifeboat of the Lingan. A little boy, Gerard Richard, 2.5 years of age, and his 6-year-old sister, Jeannette. The 2 small bodies are put on the steamship Polana.
It is ironic that it happened at a place where you can see, on either side, the villages of Île-aux-Grues and Montmagny, respectively. To be so close and to die in a foolish accident.
News of the tragedy reaches Quebec shortly before 8 a.m. The offices of the newspaper Le Soleil are then besieged by the families of the men of the Montmagny. The list of survivors is published, and the newspapers exemplify the heroism of Officer François Xavier Lachance, a 50-year-old seaman and a father of 6, who died while trying to save 2 young passengers. Several families go to the port of Quebec to meet the Canadian government ship Alice, which is carrying the crew of the Montmagny. the Alice docks in Quebec around 2:30 p.m. The men of the Montmagny descend to the pier to rejoin their loved ones. A few minutes later, the Lingan arrives in port in front of Le Quai d'Oie of the nearby town of Lévis. Beginning the next day, 3 ships are sent to recover the victims' remains. They are the Druid, the Cartier, and the Lord Strathcona. On September 25th, fishermen recover the corpse of 11-year-old Marie-Adrienne Amos Richard on the tidal flats of Petite Rivière Saint-François. The day after, the corpse of her sister, 9-year-old Emeraudienne, is washed up on the shores of Ile aux Grue. On October 5th, 13-year-old Antoinette, another child of the Richard family, is found near those same shores. The Canadian government engages the services of divers of the Canadian Salvage Association to recover the remaining corpses from the entrails of the Montmagny. A sad coincidence explains their timely presence not far from the Montmagny's wreck. They have just finished recovering corpses and valuable objects from the wreck of the Empress of Ireland, also hit by a collier, which sank on May 29, 1914, off Father Point. That tragedy killed 1,012 people. On September 25th, diver Edgar Tuck plunges down to the wreck of the Montmagny at the depth of about 15 meters near the bank of Beaujeu. Exploration is difficult because visibility is almost zero. The diver cannot enter the cabins where the corpses lie because of debris that prevent access. It does not take long for Chief Diver William Witherspoon to see that the refloat of the shipwreck will not be possible given the rapidly approaching winter. On October 17th, diver Edward Tuck dives again on the Montmagny and brings back the corpse of Ernestine Gagné, wife of Joseph Richard. A few weeks later, the corpse of Marie Fagot, wife of Joseph Lavallee, is in turn found on the banks of the St. Lawrence River. On October 6, 1914, the Court of Inquiry on the loss of the Montmagny starts its hearing in Quebec. It is presided over by Captain L.A. Demers, Dominion Commissioner. It renders its conclusion on November 6th. Captain Pouliot is exonerated of all blame. He was at his station at the moment of the accident, and he maneuvered his ship south of the channel in accordance with navigation rules. Captain Thomas Garbett of the Lingan is not held responsible for the collision, but is reprimanded all the same for retiring to his cabin when his ship was entering a narrow passage in the river.
We must remember that at the beginning of the 20th century, the main navigation channel is the South Channel that passes between the Isles of the Montmagny archipelago. And at the height of the Ile aux Grue, there is a narrow passage because to the south is found a shoal, the Beaujeu Bank. The ships then must pass between the Ile aux Grue and this shoal.
The court names 2 persons responsible for the tragedy. Pilot François Gaudreau, on board of the Lingan, did not maneuver that ship properly. Yet during the hearing, the latter nonetheless affirmed that it was the Montmagny that had deviated from its course and cut off the Lingan, thus provoking the collision. But the members of the court reject this factual contention, particularly as the lawyer of Captain Pouliot did not overlook the opportunity to recall the accident on board the Montfort in which Gaudreau was implicated. Again, the ill-fated pilot had his certificate suspended for the whole season and was also fined $200. First Officer Olaf Swanson of the Lingan also loses his certificate for 10 months.
The accident
on the Montmagny was tragic for my father, since his own father was implicated.
Lorsqu'il pensait que son père avait été impliqué dans un accident du genre. Et il a toujours voulu nous rassurer.
He always wanted to reassure us by telling us that he had all the documents in hand to prove that our grandfather, François-Xavier Pouliot, was exonerated of all blame. He steadfastly held on to that.
Il tenait à ça mordicus.
However, the men of the Montmagny are nonetheless severely reproached. Despite the speed of the shipwreck, the court finds it appalling that the passengers were abandoned to their fate. It underlines that the captain was not the last man to leave the ship. It blames the cook, Charles-Amédée Cloutier, for not having made any effort to awaken and assist the passengers he was responsible for. Finally, the court will even put forth that engineer Arthur Jobin abandoned the two children in order to flee the sinking ship. Captain François Xavier Pouliot makes the difficult decision to stop navigating for the rest of his life. Sometime after the tragedy, the Canadian government intends to refloat the shipwreck. There is a call for tenders, and on September 25, 1915, the bid of the Lévis Wrecking Company is accepted. But the belated signing of the contract prevents the start of work. On August 18, 1916, the St. Charles Navigation Company of Quebec is authorized to buy and refloat the wreck for the amount of $25,000. But the salvage operation will not succeed in refloating the Montmagny. The particularly strong current makes the venture difficult. Nonetheless, on May 10, 1918, the Public Enterprise Company commits itself to dispose of the wreck for $26,600. On August 20, 1919, during the refloating operation, a breakage again drops the ship remains to the bottom of the river. On August 22nd, it is estimated the shipwreck has slid more than 45 meters in the channel towards the southwest. On October 7, 1919, other refloating attempts end in failure. Thus, the operation is abandoned. Certain relics are recovered even though the wreck is not refloated. In July 1915, a diver brings up a compass and the ship's bell. For some relics of the Montmagny, diving is not required.
According to what my uncle told me, my grandfather had recovered a part of the Montmagny's boom. If he cut it off after the tragedy, because the booms were sticking out of the water, or if he recovered it floating on the surface after the many attempts to refloat the ship, I'm not sure. But one thing is certain, that part of the boom was found on the Île aux Canots where my grandfather lived.
A memorandum to the Commissioner of Lights, dated June 23, 1934, clearly shows that the final recovery attempt dates back to 1919. But could it be that a final attempt subsequent to this date was more successful? In any case, nothing leads one to believe that the Montmagny was ever removed from the depths of the St. Lawrence River. Director and screenwriter Alain Vézina persists in his research and finds the original position of the shipwreck, which was passed on to navigators in order to prevent accidents, at the National Archives of Canada in Ottawa. Alain Vézina contacts maritime historian Alain Frank to share his hypothesis. The forgotten wreck of the Montmagny still lies below the shores of the town of the same name. He communicates the shipwreck's coordinates to the historian. Intrigued, the latter contacts Richard Sansfasson, administrator responsible for the hydrographical surveys conducted by Fisheries and Oceans Canada. In a happy coincidence, the Guillemot, an echo ship of the Maurice Lamontagne Institute of Montjoly, must soon go to the channel of Beaujeu, scene of the shipwreck, to do depth and topography reports of the sea floor. On All Souls Day, November 2, 2010, the Guillemot team maps the area by scanning with a multi-beam echo sounder. After several sounding lines without a trace of the shipwreck, the team is about to wrap up their work when, all of a sudden, an abnormal roughness is detected on the sandy floor. The data of the echo sounder indicates beyond question the presence of a ship. A century after its disappearance, the Montmagny is found. The analysis of the images of the echo sounder allows Alain Frank to confirm that it is indeed the shipwreck of the Montmagny.
Alors, nous sommes à peu près certains qu'il s'agit
We are almost certain that it comes from the wreck of the Montmagny because its dimensions correspond to those of the ship. We can clearly see to the right of the ship's bow, here the cargo hold hatch, and these lines are in fact the ship's superstructure. Behind that, we can see the second cargo hold, and this part corresponds to the entire substructure of the vessel. Here, we can make out a form that we think to be the ship's smokestack, where one of the cargo booms fell after the collision. We can see a hole now, still visible in this image, which is in fact the deep notch left by the collier's bow after the collision.
Un navire canadien qui a coulé dans les eaux du fleuve Saint-Laurent en 1914 a été retrouvé tout près de l'île aux grues. Ce navire, il s'appelait le Montmagny.
On December 8, 2010, the news of this extraordinary discovery is disclosed to the public at a press conference held at the Naval Museum of Quebec. Michel Pouliot is present. Also present is another descendant of a crew member, Denis Cloutier, grandson of Charles Amédée Cloutier, who is the Montmagny's cook.
For my son and I, seeing these images is astounding. We told ourselves that the place where we lived before, L'Anse Agile Cap Saint-Ignace, we were probably in front of the scene of the shipwreck, and we didn't even know it. I sailed in the Montmagny archipelago with a little pleasure craft. I probably sailed over the wreck without even knowing it.
In a way, I'm glad that the wreck was found, because now we are certain of its position. However, it also brings a certain sorrow, thinking of how my grandfather must have felt during the last 20 years of his life without returning to the sea.
The Montmagny has been lying for almost a century in front of the town of the same name. Despite this indelible epitaph, the ship remains unknown to the general public. It is sometimes briefly mentioned in a book about the Titanic. To our knowledge, no one ever commemorated the shipwreck or paid tribute to the victims who perished with her. But it is never too late to recall the memory of the departed.